Do you hold back how you really feel? Say yes when you want to say no, stay quiet to avoid conflict, or not say what you really think because you're afraid it will upset someone. Then when you do get brave enough to speak up, you get a reaction like, wow, I didn't expect that from you. And you see the hurt in their face, and then you start hearing the negative Nelly in your head telling you that you did something wrong again. And you're instantly back in self-doubt, torturing yourself with shoulda, coulda, woulda. I get it. This was me for 55 years of my life. And I finally figured out what was keeping me stuck in this people-pleasing cycle of self-doubt and always feeling unable to speak up for myself. In this video, I'm sharing with you what I discovered about what was keeping me in this people-pleasing pattern that I learned was called fawning. Once I recognized what I was doing, it shifted everything for me. And I'm pretty sure it will for you too. You have heard of fight or flight, the place our body goes into when we think that we're not safe. There's also two other ones. One is called freeze, so we freeze up, we don't know what to do. The fourth one is called fawn, and it's like a last resort for the mind to keep us safe, to help us survive. And it was this last resort tactic that our brain used when we were small because we needed people to take care of us. But it taught us to be what other people wanted, to people please, to always be pleasant, to be the good girl, to give up what I needed and take care of others, always putting ourselves on the back burner. And maybe when we were little, we didn't feel seen or heard. And so it perpetuated the cycle. And then we developed shame from this because we told ourselves that we weren't doing enough, that whatever we were doing wasn't working to change the situation to get our needs met. And we think whatever is happening is our fault. Can you see this in your life? I definitely thought that what was happening was my fault. It was because of this pattern that I had developed that was just habituated, and it was a place that my body and my brain reacted from this habit that I developed as a young child that was conditioned into my brain. So this shame made me feel bad about myself, and I thought that the only way I could like myself is if other people liked me, and the only way that other people would like me is if I pleased them. So that taught me that I can't say no. I can't stand up for myself. I can't express when I'm hurt because that most likely is not pleasing to the other person, and therefore I wouldn't be liked. And here's where the really interesting part comes in. We start reacting to other people's reactions, and we think when they have a negative reaction toward us that we did something wrong. And that is what I discovered for me kept me from speaking up. That when I did say no, or I did set a boundary, or I did speak what was on my mind, or I did try and express myself, if I got a negative reaction from the other person, I thought I was wrong, that I had done something wrong, and then the guilt set in. And that's what this is all about, is trying to avoid the guilt that we think is telling us that we did something wrong. This fawning response that we have where we back down immediately when we sense that we're saying something that might hurt or disappoint the other person. There's a few different scenarios that I thought of that might be helpful for you to see. The first one is when you get a guilt-inducing reaction. It might be something like, wow, I just didn't expect that from you. I guess I was wrong. I thought you would want to help me out. Or maybe it's a passive-aggressive reaction. Like, well, okay, if it's that much trouble for you, I'll figure something else out. A toxic reaction, like, seriously, after everything I've done for you, this is how you're going to treat me? Or even a gaslighting reaction. I never said that. You're completely overreacting and being way too sensitive. And these type of reactions induce guilt in us that we've done something wrong. And so then we end up backing down, we fawn and think that we are at fault. And then we'll say something like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. Let me see, maybe I can rearrange things and help you after all. Or I probably am overreacting. I'm sorry for bringing it up. We back down and we take the blame and we think we're wrong for prioritizing our own feelings. In Andrea Matthews' book, Letting Go of Good, she talks about guilt as the ruler of life. And I'm curious to know, have you lived in this guilt and followed it as a rule? In a previous video, I talked about all these rules that we follow that are just not true, but we've been conditioned to think that they are something that we need to follow. So she says that guilt tells us what we should or should not do and should have done or not done based on rules made up by a given culture, family, or other system. Guilt does not tell us if we're being authentic with regard to what we're doing for the other person, whether or not we're on the most authentic path with regard to our choices, whether or not we're being used, or whether or not we even really care about the other person or situation we feel guilty about. It only tells us that we should or shouldn't do something based entirely on these external rules, which have been internalized as substitutes for being authentic. And guilt, she says, is a form of anxiety that creates great turmoil for us. It tortures us because we think that we're doing something wrong, which ultimately, when we think that enough, we end up thinking that we are wrong. She says the good girl doesn't see guilt as being wrong. Rather, she sees herself as wrong for even thinking about anything that guilt doesn't want her thinking about. She goes on to talk about how this guilt of other people's reactions keeps us in situations and relationships that do not serve us. And I was there. I was in a marriage that became very toxic. And my initial reaction to it was to try and make it better. And I did what I could, going to counseling. I stopped going to yoga because he wanted to spend more time with me, basically 24/7. So I stopped doing these things to try and please him. And I fawned, I backed down to try and make things right. He was gaslighting me and telling me that I was the problem, that I hadn't worked through some of the things that had happened in my past. And for a while, I believed it. And this caused me not to leave the relationship or end the relationship because the guilt of ending it and thinking that I would hurt him or what would people think if I ended it kept me in a very harmful situation, a very toxic relationship. So we end up worrying about that will hurt the other person, and the guilt then that we'll feel afterwards for hurting them. And that keeps us in situations that are not healthy or good for us. And it doesn't even have to be a toxic situation like mine was. Anytime we are changing who we are and not speaking up, not feeling free to express ourselves, we are being held captive by this guilt. And the reaction that the other people have tells us erroneously that we did something wrong. So this is what keeps us stuck in this people-pleasing pattern of not speaking up, is that we're worried about their feelings instead of trusting our own. So what can we do? Here are 5 steps you can take to reduce the stress, the anxiety that comes from this pattern of guilt that keeps you stuck in people pleasing. 5 things that you can do. And if you take any of these 5 steps, your confidence and self-esteem will skyrocket. The first thing is to recognize what's really happening here. Start by noticing the anxiety that you feel when you just think about speaking up. Where is that coming from? Remind yourself that it is just a patterned response that is coming from the subconscious mind, and the subconscious mind is just trying to keep you safe. But you can reprogram that. As an adult now, you don't need to not speak up in order to stay safe. And here's something powerful to consider, that excitement and anxiety feel exactly the same in the body. So what if you could reframe this anxiety as actually excitement about how how empowering it will feel to speak up for yourself, to say what you need to say what's on your mind, to express yourself instead of stuffing it inside and being emotionally constipated and allowing those toxins of unexpressed feelings to build up in order to avoid some discomfort. What if just reframing it as excitement allowed you to speak up and feel empowered and more confident? I encourage you to experiment. Be like a scientist. They don't know the outcome of something, so experiment. Try it once. See how it feels to start building up your own confidence by using your voice. Under this step also is to ask yourself, what story am I telling myself? Is it based on reality or is it based on a fear from the past? So the subconscious mind doesn't know the difference between imagined and real. So if you're imagining something bad is going to happen, then the subconscious mind is going to react to that and cause you to pull back and not speak up and stay in this pattern. Whereas if you could imagine something good coming out of it, that it not be this life-ending conversation, that it actually would empower you. So imagining something good is going to come out of it, then your subconscious mind won't get into this fight or flight or fawn survival tactic in order to keep you safe. It doesn't need to if you imagine it being a positive and confident building experience. The second step is to shift your focus to your why. Why do you want to speak up? Get clear about what's driving you to speak up. Is it that you want to set an example for your kids or your grandkids? Is it that you want to deepen a relationship? Is it that you want to feel seen and heard? Or maybe it's that you need to speak up to protect your time and energy. What is your why? That is the step. Because when you can clarify your why, the fear of speaking up starts to lose its power. The third step is to take action. Confidence doesn't magically appear before you act. Acting is what builds confidence. Waiting until you feel ready is what keeps us stuck. Start small. Share an opinion that you have. Say no to something minor that you know there won't be a reaction, there won't be a blow up. Or set some kind of tiny boundary, but start small. But start, because doing these little steps, these little baby steps, will create the confidence that you're wanting to have. And then it starts to snowball from there. So the fourth step is to prepare yourself with some phrases that you can use. Practice them in the mirror, right? We don't just start speaking our mind without practicing what they sound like and being more confident in saying them. Phrases like, I appreciate you asking, but I can't commit to that right now. Or I need some time to think about this. That doesn't work for me. Or even if there's a conversation that you need to have where you are going back to the past to express something that hurt you that you have never expressed before, you could say, I would love to have 5 to 10 minutes of your time to talk about something that I have been avoiding because I was afraid of your reaction. Nothing's wrong. I just need to be able to express myself. I realized a year ago that I was in a situation where I was hurt by something, and I was ruminating about, why do I feel so hurt about this, and are my feelings valid about it, and trying to justify why I felt the way I did. And then suddenly it clicked with me, it doesn't matter why I feel the way I do. The way I feel, my feelings are valid no matter what they are. But growing up as people pleasers, we think that the feelings that we have, if they're negative, that they're wrong. So pay attention to your feelings and don't try to justify them or explain them to yourself or someone else. The feelings that you have are the feelings that you have. That leads into step 5, and that is letting go of the responsibility for their reaction and know that their reaction is their reaction. It has nothing to do with what you are speaking up about. And this could be be something as simple as picking the restaurant or saying, no, you don't want to go to a certain restaurant, that I would prefer to go to ABC restaurant. And if they react to that, know that you're not doing something wrong. But we have fawned and backed down for so long that people are used to us being that way. So when we start to speak up, some people might react negatively to it because they're not used to us being that way. And they might fear that they're losing the relationship or that they're losing control. But their reaction is not telling you that you're doing something wrong. So don't allow the guilt that you feel for speaking up, and it will be there for a while. It won't go away immediately, but don't allow that guilt to allow you to think that you're doing something wrong by expressing your feelings or your opinions or your thoughts. You aren't wrong or selfish or mean or bad for expressing what you need, setting boundaries, or protecting your own well-being. And their emotions and reactions are theirs to handle, not yours. I can tell you that it is unbelievable when you start speaking your truth, when you start saying no, when you mean no, and speaking up regardless of the fear or the anxiety or the guilt that might come along with it. It is an amazing feeling to start putting yourself first. And not because you're fearless, but because you've decided that your voice matters too. This is how you start to break free from this self-doubt and anxiety and the guilt that you have been living with for, if you're like me, for 55 years. It all begins with a simple step, and I would love to hear your thoughts. What has been holding you back, and what simple step you might be willing to take now? Your subconscious, a good